Welcome, everybody. Good day. On behalf of all my colleagues here at City Community Capital, I want to thank you for joining us for this, what is a one in an occasional series of webinars on topics that we think are of interest to the affordable housing community. This is a real treat today. It's an opportunity to have a conversation with Ann Sewell and Louise Carroll, who are the heads of the housing departments of New York and Los Angeles, the two largest cities in the country. Both have a wealth of experience in the world of affordable housing and bring a real fresh energy to their position. I thought this was going to be an interesting discussion topic for us all. Even though they're very large cities, I mean, they're incredibly different from each other. There are some real similarities in these coastal urban centers in terms of the need for, the cost of, the obstacles to building and preserving affordable housing. But there are also really substantial differences in terms of the availability of funding. I think you'll find that one is well endowed and one not so well endowed. The manner in which the projects have financed. One issue uses conduit issuance, one is an open resolution. The physical nature of the cities themselves, vertical versus horizontal, and in the manner in which they're governed. There's an extreme wealth in both cities, but there's also incredible income disparity. They have some of the highest priced real estate in the country, but both rank in the top handful of cities that have the greatest percentage of rent-burdened residents. They also have large and unfortunately increasing numbers of people currently experiencing homelessness. Over 41,000 in Los Angeles, a 16% increase over the prior year, and almost 57,000 in New York. If you don't work in either city or do business in either city, you might wonder what you might learn in this session. Well, in my mind, they've both taken very innovative steps to try to address the housing crisis in their cities. They're in essence part of the large affordable housing laboratory we all participate in and learn from. What we learn in places like New York and Los Angeles and other places around the country, we're able to bring back to the places where we live and work. So I was really pleased when Ann and Louise agreed to join me in this discussion. And when the three of us initially got on the phone together, I knew it was going to be an interesting hour. First of all, not surprisingly, they actually know each other. They both participate in a forum called the High Cost Cities Forum that meets on a regular basis to share best practices, and immediately informed me that it was really the High Amenity Cities Forum. What was wonderful for someone who's in my position of interviewing people that occasionally is that all I had to do was roll the ball out, and these two would be able to talk about any subject intelligently. So let me give you a quick introduction. I can't recite all the various positions that Ann Sewell has held in the world of affordable housing and community development without running out of some time, but she has dedicated her career to creating and implementing policy and programs in government, for nonprofit developers, and for foundations dedicated to affordable housing preservation and development. Ann was the assistant general manager back in the 90s when the housing department in Los Angeles was first established. And she has now come back just about 8 months ago, I think, Ann, to become the general manager. Just before that, she was most recently the vice president of health and housing at the California Community Foundation, has been with Enterprise Community Partners, the CEO of the LA Community Design Center, which is now Abode Communities, and director of housing for the city of Santa Monica. She's on many boards and focused on affordable housing, and I can assure you she leaves every place better off than when she started. Like Ann, Louise Carroll has dedicated her career to affordable housing and community development in both New York City's Housing Development Corporation and now as commissioner of the Housing Preservation and Development Department, the largest municipal housing agency in the nation. She was general counsel at HDC just prior to coming back to HPD, where she previously was involved in such things as being the architect of changes to the city's tax credit program to leverage greater affordability. She was active in actions focused on assuring tenants' rights and designed and implemented the city's mandatory inclusionary program as part of residential rezonings. So before we start with the first questions, I do want to let people know that if you wanted to ask a question, if we have time at the end, if you send an email to askcommunitycapital@city.com, we'll try to get to that. We'll try to get that if we have if we have time at the end of the conversation. So there's a lot of ground to cover. I have a list ranging from how they have been faring in the context of this COVID crisis to issues focusing on homelessness, programs they have developed to develop new units, to preserve existing units, workforce housing, and racial equity in our industry. It's certainly more than we can cover in an hour. But I thought we would simply start with this simple question. Most of the people on this call are housing geeks, and so we think the most important thing the heads of the housing departments at the cities can do is to help us finance affordable housing. But they clearly have larger roles than just financing affordable housing. And I thought, Anne and Louise, what might be helpful for everybody is for you to describe the breadth of the job that you actually have, the other parts of your job, including affordable housing development, and what requires the most attention on a daily basis. So why don't we just start with you, Louise?
Hi, thank you so much, Richard, for having me here. It's such a pleasure to have this chat with you and with my colleague, Anne, who I've had the pleasure of trying to solve a lot of really big problems together with our colleagues around the country. New York City is the largest municipal housing agency in the country. It has about 2,400 employees spread around throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City. And our overarching goal is to promote and preserve the affordable housing throughout the city, but also the quality of the housing, the strength of the participants in the development of and preservation of that housing, and to create diversity in neighborhoods. So in addition to preserving, rehabbing, and new construction, we're in charge of the Housing Maintenance Code in New York City, which is the code that governs the quality of housing, heat and hot water, lead, pests, mold. We also are the ones who demo structures throughout the city when the Department of Buildings creates vacate orders. We are responsible for housing folks when there are disasters like fires, etc. We're also lenders, and so we have foreclosure departments, we have housing litigation department because we represent tenants against landlords throughout the city. So basically, we touch and cover every aspect of people's lives. We also issue rental assistance, both Section 8 rental assistance, federal rental assistance, as well as city rental assistance programs. So basically, every aspect of a renter's life in New York City, whether it is housing we create or private housing, we're involved in making sure that people are living safely.
How about you, Anne?
So thank you, Richard. And every time, as Richard said, I've been in this job for 8 months and have almost, I think my first week, met Louise and the other members of the High Cost Housing Forum and immediately gravitated to, the other coast, the other big city and similar issues. But I'm always slightly envious. I've started stomping around from council office to council office saying, do you realize my counterpart in New York City has $1 billion a year to spend on housing preservation and production, and I have a lousy 100 million? Does this seem right? I mean, we are half the size of New York City. So Louise is my totem that I'm really, waving at the council to try to increase our resources. Like the cities, the compare and contrast, Los Angeles is more horizontal, more spread out, and our housing programs are more spread out. So I was listening to Louise's list. We do pretty much everything that they do, except the housing authority is the public housing authority is a separate entity. So I have 670 people roughly across 4 units. that manage housing production, which, our job is a lender basically, but also a land lease, use of public lands for housing production. We have code and compliance. We not only systematically inspect every one of the 860,000 rental units in the city of Los Angeles at least once every 4 years, but we manage the 600,000 rent stabilized units in the city's portfolio. And we have community investments, which handles all of the anti-poverty programs and our funding of the joint powers agreement we have with the county to manage homelessness programs. We, CDBG, domestic violence, the emergency, the ESG grants, and others. And then we have the administrative bureau. We also have a fairly large accessible housing program, which arises out of a lawsuit and a voluntary compliance agreement with HUD that we've been really trying to figure out how to, merge with the rest of our program so that it's not something that we were dragged into kicking and screaming, but something that we can really offer as a model and a way of really providing housing that is accessible to, everybody in Los Angeles. So I'll stop there and we can go to the next questions.
Actually, while we're talking, so that accessibility issue is an interesting issue, and I mean, it's an issue that's obviously come up across. It comes up across the country. It's come up in New York as well, and it's influencing a lot of the decisions that the city is having to make at this point. And I'm wondering, just if you could spend just a minute or two talking about what the challenges have been in trying to implement. Was New York different than was Los Angeles different than any other city in terms of having that type of a requirement by the courts set on it, or is this something that was would be really more broadly applied?
So I don't know if it was different than any other city, but what I have learned is that not only do we have our own state code that pertains to accessibility, and the federal, there are 4 codes that we're working on, 3 of them arising from the feds and then 1 from the state, that have to do with accessible housing. And they, you would like to think that they were all consistent, but they aren't necessarily. And the basic premise of the code, the broadest one, is that a person with mobility issues should be able to go into a unit, any unit that you can get into in a housing, building, go into, through, and around, and use it. So get into the bathrooms, get out to the balcony, stuff like that. And a lot of the housing stock that we funded from, say, 91 on, when this code came into effect, the actual units that were deemed to be accessible for people with mobility issues or hearing and vision issues, those improvements were made, but not the ones that made the whole building accessible. And that's really, so the lawsuit arose in, I believe, 2015 or so, 2012 to 2015. And through sort of a series of, the redevelopment agencies were going away at the same time. The lawsuit really started with the redevelopment agency. The city inherited all the housing functions of the redevelopment agency. So there's about 800 properties that are covered under this settlement agreement. And the lawsuit was brought by a separate set of plaintiffs, but picked up by HUD, which also enforces the Uniform Federal Accessibility Standards and the Fair Housing Act stuff. My first day on the job, I called the court monitor who oversees this particular lawsuit with us, and because it had been described to me as an existential threat to the city's housing programs. And I said, what does success look like for you? And he said, in 4 or 5 years, when another city calls you and says they've been sued on similar things, I would love to hear the city of LA say, it was hard when we started. It took a while to get into the groove, but eventually we found a way to make it successful. So you're not going to tell that other city to, fight to the death, run screaming, that there is a path to making it work out. And I said, that's great, because that's my goal too. So we've now been able to really move forward in a way of trying to find that path, I think.
Yeah. it's really on the top of, it's almost at the top of every discussion when we walk into a meeting with the Los Angeles City staff. So it's really something of note. I don't know, Louise, if you've had a similar situation, if you've had similar situations in New York. I know we've had individual issues with buildings being built not being quite up to accessibility code, but I don't know that New York is anything quite as broad as what LA is experiencing.
No, not at all. We have the same situation where there are federal UFAS requirements as well as building code requirements, and they don't quite speak to each other. But we have been working on making sure that we understand it, and we have had some of our developers and some of our developments have been sued by the U.S. Attorney's Office for violating those requirements. So we're acutely and keenly aware of it, and we just redid our design guidelines to put them in a particular section to make sure that they're highlighted for folks. But we have a design team that does review every design for every building that we're preserving or constructing. And so we're ensuring that those plans at least meet the requirements. What happens in the field may be another issue, which is why individual buildings are being sued and not the entire portfolio.
You know, it's interesting, and I know this isn't the question that necessarily the questions that we were planning on talking about, but but what it also brings up is a topic that there are so many requirements for housing in all across the country, particularly in cities like New York and Los Angeles. And then when you add a low-income housing tax credit program on top of it and the needs of various communities, you're putting every bell and whistle on. You're putting many bells and whistles on these on a building that's meant to try to get up and house people who need it. And listen, I work in a company that is a very large bureaucracy, but clearly, you know, we're talking about two very large organizations with multiple programs, with lots of different requirements for each project. I mean, have you found, and I think there are, I don't know, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that there are complaints in either case about bureaucracy in the city. And I'm wondering how have you tried to address those issues? Or I assume you're aware of those issues. Have you tried to address those issues?
Sure. We try to address them, and we find we continuously have to readdress them. So, you know, we did make a push to reform our design review division. People who work in government tend to be very idealistic and very enthusiastic about their work to protect others. And sometimes we can layer on duplicative reviews. So at one point, we were not only reviewing for the federal requirements and maybe the size requirements in our term sheets, or maybe the size requirements of the zoning resolution, but we were also reviewing for things that our Department of Buildings also reviews for. And so, you know, our Department of Buildings has a very different process. They have a certification process. So you can certify your architect and builder can self-certify that they've complied with the building code. But then you'd come to HPD, and HPD would find building code violations and send you back to the Department of Buildings. So we tried to cut that out and stick to what is our jurisdiction and what is our mission. And to say, we have these design guidelines, we're going to make them clear for what is a must and what is we would like to have. So we would love to see outdoor space. We would love to see rooftop space. We would like to see certain things, but these are the musts, and leave the work of other departments and other agencies to them.
I see. Anne, do you have anything to add on that, just while we're talking about?
I'm agog at the thought of self-certification in the Department of Building and Safety. So learn something new, because as difficult as our processes are, you know, the rest of the city family is right there with us. It's definitely an ongoing thing. I mean, the whole, you know, customer service approach and how to streamline and how to make things faster and predictable and all that. I mean, you know, as Richard mentioned in his introduction, I've been a CEO of a regional housing development group, developed over 3,000 units as a nonprofit. I get what it is. My first instinct is to think, what's this going to do to the developers as we, talk through things. So look at that. But, my first day on the job, I met with my executive team and said, the mayor and I agreed that I have 3 goals. First is to deal with the accessibility lawsuit and make it, an integral part of our program. Second is to finish out our voter-approved, 10,000 units of housing for homeless people experiencing homelessness. And the third is to deal with the culture of the department, which was described as one council member as being the house of no. And so we really need to think about, how do we do that? Next Monday, come back to the meeting, and I said, well, it's been a week. And I'm still committed to number 1 and 2, but actually we're going to be the house of heck no, because sometimes our problem is that we are just too wishy-washy and we drag out decisions for a long time. So, we want to be yes every time we can be, but we also need to be really clear when sometimes it's no. And, one of our issues that we touch on is cost of housing. And a lot of that comes from us not saying no when other parts of the city family want to add bells and whistles onto things. Forget rooftop gardens. We're like, why don't you buy the thing next door and only develop it to half density? And, because it'd be nice to have a little community park right there. And then why don't you put that into the total cost of the housing? So it gets really expensive really fast if you don't learn to say no pretty firmly and quickly.
I think, one of the things I've learned over the years in the banking business is that people really appreciate fast no's. If it's going to be, they'd much prefer to have a yes, by the way.
Yes,
but
yes.
But if you're going to give them a no, they would love to hear. They would love to hear it quickly. So one of the things I was wondering, and I had asked you that this is something I might ask, is that how you basically set priorities in terms of what the city needs, or what kind of housing the city needs. Now, I'm not a fool in that. Well, I don't think I am anyway. In that, I think that many of these guidelines are set politically, or they're wish lists. But I also, if you can combine how you set priorities, or how priorities are set for you, but also what you think that you think based on your own experience, Anne and Louise, where the real need is when you have limited resources. Where do you spend that money? What should your priority be in a city like New York and a city like Los Angeles? And I'm going to go to you first.
Okay. Sure. So, I've been doing this for a long time, and years, maybe 25 years ago, advocates and the city really tried to emphasize building housing for working families, because we felt like the only housing that had been produced for many years was for seniors. It's more politically acceptable, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of our programs emphasized, extremely low or low income working families. Homelessness began to become a much more visible problem, not just in a few places like, the Skid Row neighborhood of downtown, but across the city. And it was almost always a problem of the visible street homelessness was a problem of individual people with either mental or physical disabilities, and just people who'd been economically displaced and couldn't get back into the system. So for the last 6 or 7 years, the city's resources in terms of subsidy have really been focused on addressing people who are currently experiencing homelessness. The reality, of course, is we know that people fall into homelessness all year long, and without, more housing to prevent that, and to make it possible for somebody who, loses an apartment to find another apartment, we are always going to be playing catch up. So we need to have prevention as well as, new production of housing for people who are on the street. So we're really about preventing people from falling into homelessness and increasing supportive housing, which frankly, we're seeing the new counts tell us that probably most people that are, a third of the people that are first-time homeless people are also seniors. So all these issues are starting to come together of dealing with people who are aging in place in affordable housing, dealing with people on the street who are aging. We really need to address all of it.
How about you? How about you, Louise, in terms of priorities and how you establish?
So, I was at HPD during the Bloomberg administration and here for the de Blasio administration. So about 2012, when we looked at the data, there are about 50% of New York renters were rent burdened, meaning they spent more than 30% of their income on rent. And about 30% of New York renters were severely rent burdened, meaning they're spending 55% of their income on rent. In addition, we had a homeless crisis. We still do. There are over 50,000 families, mixture of households in shelters in the city. And when you think of the size of that problem, I love that my colleague says we have an average of $1.3 billion to spend on our housing production. That is, when you look at the numbers of who's rent burdened, that's just not enough. And when you consider that there's going to be a 40% increase in seniors between 2010 and 2040 on fixed incomes in a city where salaries have stagnated, that number is just not enough. So we had to. So yes, we intend to provide housing for the homeless, for low-income New Yorkers. Housing for seniors, supportive housing, but we had to pick the rate at which we're going to do this production and how we were going to tackle it. And so in the Bloomberg administration, we found that we had a private public partnership that produced about 15,000 units a year. And we thought if we could produce 20,000, if we could stretch that public-private partnership to produce 20,000 a year, we came up with the mayor's original plan of 200,000 units by 2026. We ramped up, and then we found, well, if we can increase to 25,000 units a year, we could increase that production to 300,000 by 2026. And we, so it's a combination of capital and it's of money and human capital. There are just only so many banks, so many lawyers, architects, project managers throughout the city. So yes, we have programs that need all of that, but we needed to have tax incentive programs that produce market participants would produce housing without us. And so we had the 421A program, which is could be a 75 program for market rate housing and affordable housing, where we would give a tax exemption for about 35 years if a developer would produce that housing on their own. We rezoned. We went through a rezoning. In New York City, rezonings are, more as of right without any requirement for affordable housing. So a developer can go to our planning department and say, I'd like to rezone this property to go from a certain amount of bulk to a greater bulk, and they could get that approval without any requirement to produce affordable housing. And we thought, in exchange for some of that bulk, they should be required to produce housing for a range of incomes. And that would help us meet some of those goals. We have tax exemption only term sheets where we're saying, look, if you can, we'll give you a full property tax exemption if you will bring an existing property into regulation. And so thereby we have homeownership programs where we're leveraging home funds to help with down payment assistance, and we're producing homeownership opportunities. So to come to 25,000 units, we're really, aside from using our low-income housing tax credits and our bond financing, and our own lending capacity, we're using a lot of different tools to bring to bear to fill the market. And we're finding that, that just isn't enough. We need a way for people to afford their own rent in addition to what we're doing. And I think when we look at the federal stimulus and the way the federal government is now helping people in this crisis, we sort of need to think differently long-term on a federal level, where there are rental subsidies that sort of meet people on a 6-month basis or meet people on a longer term basis, where people can actually just go out in the market and afford the housing that's already there. But in terms of how we're thinking about the problem, we're thinking about it both as a capacity from you, right? All of the lenders and the participants in the market, and our own capacity.
And just decided to move to New York.
Come over, Anne. We could use you.
The rezoning, the walk-in rezoning, and then you self-certify. I don't understand why we have any builders here. Why are they not all in? Yeah.
So actually, Louise, just to follow up on that, I just want to say there was one other thing that that's been happening in New York over the last year or two. I guess I don't is that in affordable housing projects that are financed with HPD funds, that you're also requiring that a certain number of the units in each project be used for formerly homeless people. Are you not also doing? You're also doing that, right?
Absolutely. So we had been doing this on our own. We had in our low-income housing term sheets, as well as our supportive housing. Our supportive housing is currently 30% a homeless requirement. But in our regular low-income housing term sheets, we had been requiring a set aside for homeless households in order to help with the shelter problem. The city council decided they would legislate the good work we're already doing. And so they passed a bill to require a 15% set aside in our new construction. During the COVID crisis, we did better. We went and did better than that. During the COVID crisis, we realized that overcrowding in the shelters was going to be part of our problem in New York City. We were at the epicenter of this at the very beginning. It was not because of our density, but because of overcrowding. And so we went to all of our developers and said, for everything that's marketing during this crisis, it's built, it has a TCO, increase that set aside to up to 30%. And we will pay the rent, whatever it is. If it's a middle income rent, we'll pay it. If it's a low income rent, we'll pay the rent differential to get a homeless person in there. And so far, we've done close to 1,000 placements just through that during the COVID crisis, which is in addition to our regular homeless set aside.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, and we're obviously in a different city. For those who don't know, I live in the West Coast these days, although I grew up in New York with this accent. We obviously live in a different city. We live in a different world. We also live in a world where redevelopment agencies were taken off the books during the Brown administration during the financial crisis here. And so one of the best sources of funding for affordable housing was taken out of the book. So, Anne, how do you manage? I mean, without those types of resources, how can you influence what's going on in the city in terms of affordable housing production?
Yeah. So just, everybody listening, if you didn't hear me say this, New York is roughly twice the size, a little over twice the size of Los Angeles. So every time I listen to Louise's numbers of let's stretch from 200,000 to 300,000, I think we should be doing 150,000, but we're not. So the state of California requires that every locality create an 8-year plan called a regional housing needs assessment that sets its production goals based on the expected household formation, how many children will grow up, the number of new jobs, and recently, and shockingly to all the localities, your pent-up demand that wasn't met by your last 6 regional housing needs assessment cycles. So our number jumped to 460,000 units that need to be built over the next 8 years just to meet that demand of new households, people in new jobs, and the pent-up demand. And of that, about 280 are low-income units that are needed. So as listening to Louise, it's separated into different city departments, but it's not very different. We try to use both Los Angeles and New York are strong market cities, right? Developers are going to develop, and you try to use incentives like property tax exemptions or density increases. You cannot just walk in and get a rezoning in Los Angeles. I mean, like, we have the California Environmental Quality Act, so you will pretty much lose the will to live before you have rezoned anything. But we will require that you put some affordability into it. And in 2016, the voters in Los Angeles approved this really creative thing that created extra density hubs around transit that got rid of parking requirements and allowed more density if you provided either 11% extremely low income units or up to 20% lower, and sort of graded along. That took off like hotcakes. I mean, the fact that you could cut parking, and parking is $50,000 a space, and we were requiring 2 spaces per unit, so that gets pretty crazy. So being able to not have parking and to go to higher densities, developers were grabbing at that. So we really have increased. We have about 30,000 units in that pipeline, of which about 5,000 are affordable with no subsidy. So we spend our limited subsidy dollars on folks that are under 60% or 50% or 30% of median income, and we're probably only doing about 2,000 units a year for those folks, and the need is so much greater. So we made this big jump with another voter-approved, property, basically a general obligation bond that we pay off through property taxes in 2016, where we wanted to go from producing 300 supportive housing units to 1,000 every year for 10 years. We are going to exceed that by 1,000 units. We're going to do it 2 years earlier. And yet pretty much any Angelino on the street that you say, so what do you think about Measure HHH? They'll say, it's a complete failure because there's still people on the street. It's homelessness ticked up, even though, we were doing more housing production than ever, which really speaks to the need for that prevention, keeping people from falling into homelessness, as well as being able to, move more quickly as we do development.
Why don't we kind of focus a little bit on the pandemic, the issues that have been brought up by the pandemic. We don't have to talk about. I mean, everyone's very much aware of the fact that it has created additional homelessness and put real strain on families. I'm wondering if you could just talk for a minute or two, both of you, and we can start with you, about the various rental assistance programs, and we have programs at the state level, we have programs at the federal level, we have a new program, obviously, that the city I see is getting 118, is going to be eligible for 118 million, I think, is what it is, and New York is like 246, I think.
About 270 something, 271 maybe.
Yeah, a good chunk of money. How has that worked, and has that been as efficient as you would like, or if you could just chat for a minute about how that's working for you?
So last year, between July and December, with our just general purpose coronavirus relief funds that every city pretty much got, every large city, we put $100 million into an emergency rental assistance program where eligible low-income renters could get $2,000 to help pay the rent. All you had to do was have a coronavirus-related job loss or income loss and be income eligible. And we served about 50,000 households with that in that period of time. The stimulus act that was passed in December, signed in December, created this new emergency rental assistance program. As you said, Richard, we got $118 million directly from the Treasury, but then the state of California got money also. So our total pot that we're putting out starting Monday, a couple of days ago, is $244 million, has to go out in pretty much 5 months. And it's a much more complicated calculation of not only, okay, you're income eligible and you can certify that you had, losses related to COVID, but how much of your rent from when the pandemic started till now have you not been able to pay? And in the state of California passed the legislation that went along with this money. Your landlord's going to be asked to take a 20% cut and waive that permanently. So we can pay 80% of your back rent if your landlord agrees to cooperate and pay, and forgive the 20%. If not, we can pay the 25% just directly to the tenant to pay the rent. Part of the state legislation that was clever and certainly crazy from a landlord's point of view is the unpaid rent, as long as the tenant has paid 25% and made certain notices to the landlord, converts to consumer debt. You cannot be evicted for consumer debt. It can be like having a student loan on your credit report forever and certainly cause you problems, but it will convert to consumer debt, and then the tenant will be starting fresh in July with, trying to keep up with rent.
This is the worry for us, because we are also lenders. We are municipal agencies, but we're also lenders, and we have portfolios, and we have deals that we put together and partners that if they go under, they're coming back to us, right? They're putting those buildings back to us. So we've had that worry throughout the pandemic, because we could see in our portfolio, there's maybe been a 90 to 75% to 90% collection. Some buildings have needed forbearance. People have needed to tap into their reserves. From a quality of building standpoint, because as I said before, we're responsible for the housing maintenance code. You want those buildings to continue to provide heat and hot water and be free of pests and rodents and lead and mold. And so our agency felt threatened in many different departments by the crisis and the inability to pay rent. And we found that our Section 8 was exhausted, right? Everybody who had Section 8 kept it. And so the rental subsidies, when they came, we're also a right to shelter city. So we do have, our Human Resources Administration has a program called One Shots, where if an individual can't pay their rent, they would apply to HRA, and HRA would pay the rent to the landlord on their behalf and maybe sign them up for public assistance. And what we found was that we could not, however the money came to the city, we never got a hand on a dime in order to give out rental subsidy. So that was, which made, we made a lot of calls to Washington and everywhere else to say, one, we need more, a lot more, right? And we needed to be able to access it. But until you gave aid to cities and states, any money that came from the federal government had to go to other things, including COVID-related relief. It could not go to rental subsidy. But a very perverse thing also happened, which is because of the eviction moratorium, people would not go to our HRA even to apply for the one-shots. So while we lent them staff in anticipation for the tsunami of people who would come in and ask for the rental assistance that's already in existence, that didn't happen. And yet landlords were struggling. Tenants didn't have money to pay. And so we had been working on a lot of things. We felt like the federal government gave homeowners the ability to tack on the unpaid mortgage to the back end, right, in order to give relief. They had not done that for multifamily. And if they would only do that for multifamily, that would give landlords some of the breathing room that they needed on their debt, because with a lack of revenue. We asked for more Section 8, an increase in the ability for us to issue Section 8, because we had reserves, we could do it. And we asked for more emergency rental assistance. The way it's been put out, as you know, has not preempted states from trying to add bells and whistles to this, so the money can't really flow as fast as we'd like it. The split of funds, some to the state and some to cities and municipalities, has created confusion about where you go and who do you go to for those funds. And in New York City, we are the majority of the renters and we have the majority of the problem. So even giving us $271 million and giving the rest to the state, in fact, we probably deserve 80% of all of that money. So, we have a great relationship with our state HFA. And so we had been working on, okay, how do we have a joint program? How do we learn from California and from other places that had stood up rental assistance programs really quickly to get the money out? And then we found that our state HFA was not going to get the money after all. It was going to be the human resources side that was going to get the money. And so now we're in a consultancy mode with our city human resources administration to teach them everything we'd learned when we were really, really geared up to do this ourselves. And to also insert ourselves in their state relationship to say, look, we could help you. This is what we know. And so we're finding this a very ineffective way to get money out. And we're watching the eviction moratorium coming to an end. And we hope there's not a mass eviction crisis. But on the other end, we're asking landlords to clean buildings on a regular basis, to keep staff on, to continue to pay their debt. And so I hope after this new stimulus, we have a real rethink on the federal level of how we create a facility for multifamily. To me, the most effective way is to create a facility whereby their debt could be extended and they could have breathing room as well as rental assistance. Because I think if we don't calm this housing situation down and actually support landlords, our recovery is not going to be at the speed that we want.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting coming from the banking perspective. Obviously, we deal with a lot of larger developers, so it's not a really good sample, quite frankly. I think what we have found, particularly in the affordable housing industry, and this is just anecdotal, so I wouldn't say that it's necessarily correct, but the people who build and own housing, nonprofits, for-profits, this is what they do. They have great relationships with their tenants. They have relationships with their tenants. And so they were actually have been a great resource in helping those tenants through the bureaucracy of getting the type of rent relief that they need. My guess is, and it's purely a guess, is that the bigger issue is probably with smaller landlords who are somewhat less sophisticated, who might be less sophisticated and don't have those same types of access to the information that some of the larger developers do. But that's my
And I would say you're right. And early on, the big owners entered payment plans as well on their own with folks to say, hey, I'll give you some breathing room. You will pay a portion of the rent. But, New York City also had a very curious thing happen, which is anybody who had a second home fled to the Hamptons or to New Jersey or to Connecticut. And there were some folks in some of our very, very, our luxury buildings who said, hey, I live in the Hamptons now. My things may be in your unit, but I am in the Hamptons, so I'm not going to pay the rent. Or some people said, look, the kids are at home, they're making too much noise. Until you deal with the noise issues, I'm going to deduct from rent. So we had everything going on, and we had people who could pay rent in the cancel rent movement who said that they would not pay rent in solidarity for their neighbors who did not have the means to pay rent. So we were dealing with every type of situation. But you're right. The bigger landlords and the people who were able to keep their jobs and work from home had a more stable time.
Yeah. We only have a few more minutes, so I want to go touch on two things real quickly. And I know one of the things, and it's actually happened more on the West than it has in the East. We've had a lot more success in starting the process of using, the cost of housing, developing a unit of housing is just crazy. We all know that, particularly of affordable housing. And some of that is having to do with the requirements. And there's been more and more use of what we would euphemistically call off-site construction, which other people might call modulo. We try to get away from that. And you've done the city of Los Angeles has actually had an innovation program as part of the HHH. This is the money for for building homeless projects. And I'm wondering what your initial experience and thoughts are on modular, or on other ways to bring down the costs of housing that you could talk about for a minute or two.
Sure. Well, I think the first step in talking about the cost of housing is really requiring that everybody be truthful, because one of the things that drives me insane is on affordable housing, we literally, cost certify everything, right? Every single dime that got spent on a project. And then a builder will come into one of our, council members or a commissioner and say, that's ridiculous. I can do it for $200,000 a unit. It's like, you can, but did you? And will you ever share no, of course not. So there's this, apples to apples, apples to oranges thing. Affordable housing, especially supportive housing, is basically built to be a little self-contained, physical and financially sustainable thing for 55 years. It's going to have its developer fee included in the budget. It's not going to it has no liquidity event in 3 years when it sells to somebody where it's going to get its developer fee. It's going to have that in the budget. It's going to have reserves in the budget. It's going to have, furnishings and everything. Like if you try to compare it to I have literally started holding up, market rate developers who need something from us, some sort of accommodation, demanding that they give me their real numbers, and trying to come up with apples to apples. So, it seems that the real cost increases for affordable housing and for supportive housing we're seeing under HHH are, the inclusion of all those things like developer fees and reserves, prevailing wage. There's not a single project that we do that doesn't have prevailing wage, and in some cases, project labor agreements. And so, the costs of labor, the high demand for labor, that's definitely in there. So that's, reality would really help, because then we'd know what we're trying to adjust for. So the city did create $120 million pot out of the HHH funding for innovation. We really encourage people to look at construction innovations like modular or whatever we're calling it, offsite stuff. And I think what we're learning from some of that is that modular can, if you look at the total construction costs of a project, modular probably is 40%. The things that you can build in the factory are 40% of the total construction costs. The things that have to happen on site, like electrical vaults and, grading and foundations and things like that, as well as the, roof and bringing the utilities in, are about 60% of the cost. So you can bring the cost down, and that's good. You can definitely bring the speed down. But what really makes things, faster and cheaper is if you are ruthlessly standardized across a fairly decent portfolio of units in your modular development. So we've been trying to learn from that. It's a challenge because lenders get, concerned. We're used to, I'm going to pay for that lumber when it appears on the site and it's stacked on the site. And the fact that it's 400 miles away, even though it has a cool little barcode that says this belongs to, XYZ project, and it's all securable but it is 400 miles away. So, and it has to be put together, put on a truck, arrive on site safely. And there's too many stories of things happening that lenders are really trying to get comfortable. I think as we move more and more projects into using that, the horror stories of the past will become, funny little one-offs, maybe not so funny when your building slid off the truck in Idaho as it was heading to Los Angeles, but we'll laugh about it someday. Now we're going to need some more successful projects to be done. But I think we're going to have, in about a year, we'll have a good body of projects that we can share out with people.
So I've given up on the cost. I'm thinking about reducing the cost of housing. Oh Lord, I'm going to regret I said that next time I'm talking to a developer, but I truly have. I feel like we have not done enough modular for us to see a cost differential right now. I think when we're asking for affordable housing in New York City to be better, that it should have broadband, that it should be designed now post-pandemic for us to be able to live in it for 24 hours instead of 12 hours like we thought we should live in our homes, where we're asking for amenity space, we're attaching hip hop museums and STEM units and daycare and every kind of thing, because our role is also changing neighborhoods that have been disinvested in, right? To bring grocery stores and to make things placemaking. I don't know how you say that we're going to reduce costs. I think now more of cost shifting, as in who pays. So I think that, we just had the 4% fix in tax credits so the next thing we're after is lowering the 50% test so we can do more. The other thing we're trying to do is maybe reduce the volume cap on preservation altogether, right? On public housing, basically trying to get more sources in as opposed to reduction at this point, because we have all these, we want to do passive house. We want to change all of the HVAC systems and change to heat pumps. These are all of the things that we're trying to do to improve the quality and look of housing. A lot of things that make housing cheaper for some of our developers is they use the same plans and architects. And I really hate walking through a neighborhood, and I take these neighborhood tours where they're beautiful buildings, but they start looking alike. And so now you can tell that they're affordable housing because the design and plans and the materials are looking alike. And to me, that's not how we want to go. And that's not how you plan a city. And that's not how you plan the way forward for folks. So all of that is to say, I've given up on, is it cost efficient for what you're asking? And how many sources can you pull in?
Well, thank you. I have totally blown this in that we have now gone a little bit over the hour that we were supposed to be. And I still had a few questions to ask. So I didn't quite time this right, but it's really been a very interesting discussion. And I know that with both of you as advocates in Washington and in your states that hopefully we'll get some of those things that you mentioned, Louise, because lowering the 50% test, I haven't actually heard the one where we give carte blanche to preservation and public housing, but I'm all for it. Then hopefully we'll be able to make even a slightly bigger dent in these issues than we have in the past. But I do want to thank both of you really for joining me and giving me your time. This is really very meaningful for me and for us and our groups. And I know I had a number of questions here that I would have liked to have gotten to, but unfortunately we didn't have a chance. So thank you very much for participating.
Thank you.
I hope that we get a chance to actually see each other physically sometime soon.
Absolutely.
And thank you all for joining us today at City Community Capital's webinar. Hopefully we'll see all of you again soon as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.